Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here today at Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave, this is Olive, and we talk about books of all kinds to help spread the joy of reading. So we are partaking in the reading event Horror Mayhem, which means basically throughout the month of May we focus on short horror fiction. So as we mentioned in a previous video, what we're doing is we are going to be reading some short horror books, and we're also going to be supplementing that with horror short stories throughout the month of May. So we had picked out a book to do each week. There's May's 4.5 weeks, so there's 5 weeks in which we can read a book. So we have the 5 books picked out, and we're also going to be reading short stories from a couple anthologies along with those. So we just wrapped up week 1, and let's get into what we read. So the book we read this week is The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. So this book is this is a novella that is very, very old. This was originally published in 1907, and it as part of a collection called, I think it was The Listener and Other Stories. And this is considered a very famous horror classic. And basically what this had influence on a lot of other people like H.P. Lovecraft and other famous horror writers. And what this one is about is, with all of these, we can only say so much because they're short. We don't want to spoil. But what this is about is there's our narrator and the narrator's companion, which is referred to as the Swede. And they're traveling down the Danube River. And they come upon a section of the river that really just becomes more like swampland, and it's punctuated by a bunch of different islands that are temporary, based on the flows of the river. And so they spend most of their time on land as they go through this particular portion of the river. And the book is basically extremely atmospheric. It is basically the different aspects of nature, like the river and wind, and of course the willows, which basically cover the island that they're on, are all personified to some extent to basically represent these sort of otherworldly entities that they're encountering during their stay on land. And it's not crystal clear, the nature of this, but you're sort of led to believe that this area that they're in is sort of like a connection point, if you will, maybe between worlds, or well, I don't want to say too much more than that, and so there are these other entities there that are sort of right on the other side of a veil, and are sort of manifesting in these aspects of nature that Blackwood personifies in his very, very descriptive atmospheric representations of these things. And so it's very, very eerie. So a lot of people really love this book, and I would say that we liked it. We thought we would like it more, but we did like it. We certainly thought it was very creepy, and it was a good story. The one thing that we didn't like a little bit about it was the writing, and this might just be because the writing it's more old-time writing. The writing was a little bit cumbersome at times. The writing style wasn't really very fluid. So, that we did find ourselves often rereading sentences or a couple of sentences. So it went as short as it went a little slowly for us. But that was really our only complaint. Other than that, it was a pretty good story, and it was really pretty. You really are put into the minds of the characters, and it definitely is creepy and scary. So and pretty original, the way that the horror is essentially, although there's mysterious entities, the horror is essentially presented in the form of the environment. So it was pretty cool. Definitely a story worth reading. The reason we had read this, and I mentioned this before, was we had wanted to read this because we had read a book, a relatively recent book that came out in 2020 by called The Hollow Places by Kingfisher. And we knew there was a connection between them, but we didn't know what it was about because we had never read the Willows. And so the Hollow Places, also a really good book, which we would recommend. This is, I don't want to say it's a retelling of the Willows, but kind of. There is an awful lot of the Willows in this story. So this takes place more in modern day, but it starts in a different setting. It's kind of starts in a really like a curiosity shop, but they encounter a portal and end up going to this other realm where they encounter other things, and that is where you see a lot. You will, if you are familiar with the Willows, you will see a lot of that in this book. But the Hollow Places, as you can see, is quite a bit longer, so there's a lot more to it. And I actually like the Hollow Places better than I like the Willows, but they were both good. I mean, they're definitely both worth reading, and so it's since this one's so short, I would recommend reading them together because the Hollow Places is a fun book to read, but you will definitely get more out of it once you know the story of the Willows. So that was the book that we read, and then as we said, we were going to be supplementing them with short stories throughout. And so our main anthology that we're using, at least in the beginning of the month of May, is this one, The Best of H.P. Lovecraft, Blood-Curdling Tales of Horror and the Macabre. So we read basically the first 3 stories out of this book. The first one is that we read, and we can't say much about each of them, but just to give you a little flavor without spoiling it. The first one is The Rats in the Walls. This one was a little bit longer of a short story. This one was first published in Weird Tales in 1924, and that story was about that story was about a guy that basically I don't think he inherited it. I think he bought his old family ancestral home that has a very long history, that had been used for a number of different things over time, and there had been some real something very scandalous in the family's history that had happened there. So he takes it over, starts to restore it. The locals aren't very happy about that, and as he restores it, along with a friend, they start to uncover more and more. They hear what they think are rats in the walls. And so that leads them to investigating further and uncovering more and more about the history of this place. And it really, by the time you get to the end of the story, it really, you unearth a lot of very serious history there. And it's got a pretty cool, I guess, twist ending. So that was a pretty neat story. That one was pretty intense. The next one we read was a much shorter short story called The Picture in the House. And this one was first published in, I think it was called The National Amateur in 1921. And then it was subsequently reprinted in Weird Tales in 1923. And that story was about a guy. It starts off talking about how one of the scariest settings is these old farmhouses, right, that have sometimes been standing. They're old and abandoned and dilapidated, and they've sometimes been standing for hundreds of years and have a lot of history to them and characters that have been there. And so he ends up getting stranded and goes into one of these old farmhouses, and can't say much more other than that. He sees a picture in some old stuff in there, finds an old book, and sees a picture in the book, and then that picture, leads to more about this house. And that's really all I can say. Very short story, but really, really enjoyed that one. And then the last story that we read was The Outsider. And this was also a short one. This was also published in Weird Tales in 1926. And this one is about you sort of wake up from the perspective of this character, the outsider, who doesn't know who he is or where he is. And so the story is him sort of exploring to find that out, so that he starts going out and up and sort of discovering where he is. And then by the end of the story, he finds out who he is. And so you get some hints along the way. It's not that long a story, but it was very cool. That was a cool story too. We definitely enjoyed that. So far, 3 for 3 hits with the 3 Lovecraft stories we've read so far, and we're looking forward to reading the rest of them in this book throughout the month of May. So that's what we read in week 1. We'll see you again a few days for a non-horror mayhem video, but then again we'll see you for a recap for week 2 to let you know what we read next. So as always, thanks so much for watching. If you've read any of these stories or the Willows or the Hollow Places and have any thoughts on those you'd love to share, we'd love to hear from you. As always, let us know what you're reading for Horror Mayhem, if you're reading anything and you're participating in the event. But if you don't want to leave anything substantive, you can always leave Olive a puppy emoji. She, of course, always likes to see those. So, as always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.